Support for Faith on Trial and Iowa Catholic Radio provided in part by Imogene Ingredients.
Our freedom of conscience and religion is being challenged by laws and regulations imposed by secular society. It's time to hear from the top Christian litigators in the nation who have come forward to tell us the truth and help us defend our faith.
Hear ye, hear ye. All rise. Faith on Trial with Defender of the Faith, Deacon Mike Menno, is in session.
Welcome once again to Faith on Trial. We examine the influence of law and society on people of faith. I'm Deacon Mike Manley, your host, and I'm here in our studios with Gina No, our co-host. Gina, how are you this morning?
I'm doing very well, Deacon Mike.
We always have to remind people, I guess, that we tape Thursday morning, so we talk about morning even though you're going to hear us in the afternoon and evening over the weekend.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Winter is on its way. Did you see the snowflakes fly on Wednesday?
Well, I saw a lot of things fly on Wednesday.
Oh, very windy. Yes,
very windy.
Felt
yeah,
very blizzardy. Yeah. So we've got winter. A new season is about to begin here.
Yeah, new season, and I guess a new administration coming in January.
Yeah, lots of changes. Mm-hmm. I'm real anxious to see what happens next. The news this week was a little. I said a lot of prayers. You know, it feels like we're building up our military efforts in Ukraine and maybe even in Israel. So,
well, the problem with
we got to pray for peace.
Stuff in Ukraine has always been that the Biden administration gave Ukraine enough stuff, enough aid to keep the war going, but not to win it. And so it's drug out. Hopefully Trump will get in there and do something to stop it.
Oh, well, he says he's for peace, so we'll see. Hopefully he will.
Well, we're all for peace.
I'll feel better about it.
Yeah, I will too. There are too many people dying over there.
Absolutely. Yeah, and hurting and without their homes. And
then the Middle East, Israel, and what's going on over there. That's something that we've got to...
Speaking of, how do you feel about Mike Huckabee as the ambassador appointment to Israel?
Probably a very good pick.
I think so, too.
Probably a very good pick.
I think he'll be very beneficial. I've always liked Governor Huckabee, first Governor Huckabee.
Yeah, the first Governor Huckabee. And then our old friend, the former acting Attorney General.
Oh, a guest on our show multiple times. Yes, Matt Whitaker was appointed.
He is going to be the U.S. ambassador to NATO.
That's right.
Yeah, so that's a big position.
And that's assuming all these picks get approved by the
I
Senate.
think the only one that's really in serious trouble is Gates.
Matt Gaetz from Florida. Is he Florida? Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll have to wait and see.
We'll have to see what goes on.
As everybody says, it's the art of the deal.
That's right.
And nobody better than Donald Trump make a good deal.
We'll see what happens. I know I was with some parishioners. I think you were at the ball game, at the Iowa State game, and couldn't make the gathering that we had the other night. And everybody seemed to be real excited about Bobby Kennedy.
We'll have to wait and see how that works, too. Every time I pick up something to eat, I wonder, would Bobby approve of this?
And I think that's probably what he's going to go after first, is food.
Well, this will be very interesting.
We'll see.
It's definitely a paradigm shift in our federal administration.
That's right. It certainly is. All right. Let's see what we have today. For today. We have Mark Lucas, who is the Executive Vice President of the Article 3 Project. And this is a group that you've been wanting to have on the program for some time now. We've got him coming today.
Yes, I think Article 3 was involved in Article 3 Project was involved in the judicial reviews for the judges when Trump's first administration needed some assistance in who to...
I think the Heritage Foundation helped him out, too.
Okay.
The lawyers over there, yeah.
Yeah, so it's nice that it'll be interesting to talk to Mark and find out what's going on over there and catch up.
And see what it is that they really, really do. That would be nice.
That let us know all the...
And then John Brusch, who is the Senior Counsel and Vice President of Appellate Advocacy for the Alliance Defending Freedom, is going to be on. And we're going to talk about a case of a Colorado counselor who is being censored by the state for what that counselor says in therapy sessions.
And they're headed to the Supreme Court, right?
They're asking for review by the Supreme Court.
Okay.
You can ask, you may not receive, but there sounds like they may have a good case.
This is a very complicated case. I don't understand law, and it seems very clear on its surface, but it'll be interesting for John to get into the weeds and tell us why this isn't as simple as it might sound.
And it's not a singular case. There are other cases similar to it around the country where the state is trying to govern what counselors can say in counseling sessions, especially when they're dealing with people who have gender dysphoria or sexual identity problems.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, John, I'm sure will bring us up to date.
We will, and this is the guy to do it. We've had him on several times before, and he's always a very good guest.
Well, Alliance Defending Freedom is a very popular guest.
Very popular guest over here, that's right. Do you have a prayer to open us up with?
I do have a prayer for peace today. God of peace, bring your peace to our violent world. Peace in the hearts of all men and women, and peace among the nations of this earth. Turn to your way of love those whose hearts and minds are consumed with hatred. Strengthen us all in hope, and give us the wisdom and courage to work tirelessly for a world where true peace and love reign among the nations and in the hearts of all. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. We're going to take a short break right now. You're listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. And we're back. You're listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network, and we have with us right now Mark Lucas, who is Executive Vice President of something called the Article 3 Project. And first thing you have to do, Mark, is to tell us what is the Article 3 Project, why are you in business, and what is it you do?
Yes, the Article 3 Project was founded by Mike Davis, who's from Des Moines, Iowa. Him and I met at the University of Iowa in college, and he was very instrumental in Neil Gorsuch being confirmed to the Supreme Court. After he ran that outside effort for Gorsuch, he went to work for Senator Chuck Grassley as the chief counsel of nominations. So Mike, during Trump's first term, helped confirm a record number of judges all across the country. And because he was so effective on the confirmation process and helping select really good constitutionalist judges, Mike started the Article 3 Project. And so we're focused on defending the rule of law, of helping confirm good judges, but also beating back against bad judges. And we also want to help ensure election integrity. And we're going to be very instrumental in cleaning up the Department of Justice and returning our country back to a respect for our rule of law.
You're going to have a big job.
I was going to say, that sounds like a big job. Yeah.
What went wrong with the Department of Justice? Let's just start right there. Something real simple.
Yeah, so what we saw in the election was a repudiation from the American people on this weaponization of our government against political opponents. You know, President Trump, he was unlawfully targeted by the FBI and intelligence agencies. You might remember that unlawful and unprecedented home raid on Mar-a-Lago. And that really opened a lot of people's eyes to see all of this lawfare being waged against a former president, also a multi-billionaire. And if the United States government is able to target somebody like him, the normal citizens like me, we have no shot. So we really believe that when we looked at what was going on with Jack Smith in Washington, D.C., with Alvin Bragg's case, who's the Manhattan DA, with Fannie Willis and her unqualified boyfriend, Nathan Wade, down in Fulton County, Georgia, we saw an unprecedented amount of lawfare being waged against a citizen. We believe that there's a good chance that there is a criminal conspiracy against the rights of President Trump. And if they're able to do that to such a powerful former president, they can do it to anybody. So we want to ensure that we clean up the Department of Justice and return it back to its core mission of an equal application of the law, like our founding fathers intended with our Constitution.
Well, they even took out after the Catholic Church.
Exactly. You know, we saw the 75-year-old grandmother who's wheelchair-bound, who was sentenced to 24 months for violating the Faith Act, and that was because of a very corrupt civil rights division from the Biden administration. We saw Christian parents that were showing up to school board meetings concerned about the gender chaos and the resulting rapes that were happening in high school bathrooms. You know, we saw with Kamala Harris, you know, when she was a United States Senator, she was really bigoted towards the Knights of Columbus. So we saw in this administration just a lot of Catholic bigotry. And even in the traditional Catholic community, you had FBI field offices trying to collect intelligence from people just going to Mass. So we have a lot of work to do to restore religious liberty and ensure that we protect these people, Catholics and Christians all across the country.
We know about a lot of the stuff against the Catholics because we've had Kyle Seraphin, the FBI whistleblower, on the program several times. And he's clued us into what they were doing, taking license plate numbers down in parking lots of Catholic churches and things like that, and attempting to infiltrate Catholic churches, especially the traditional Catholic churches, the ones that still do the Latin Mass. And that's a big concern to us. Another concern was Kamala Harris. In the last week or so of the campaign, she decided she was going to promote reinstituting Roe versus Wade by legislation. And she indicated that there would be no religious exception in her bill, which meant that Catholic doctors and hospitals would be forced to perform abortions, and there'd be no ability for anybody to say, I'm opposed to that for religious reasons. They wouldn't be able to do that. So what you're saying is very true.
And with Kamala, I think one thing that really stood out to me during her debate with President Trump, she was obviously very well prepared. There's some questions of whether or not she received the questions in advance. But when she tried to talk about the economy, or she tried to talk about immigration or the border or crime, her answers seemed scripted. But when she started talking about abortion, she had such a passionate response. And that's what's so scary, is how these leftists have tried to impose this abortion, these mandates or whatever you want to call it, with Roe v. Wade. They are visceral in their response when it comes to abortion. And I thought that was very telling to see that from her in the debate. It seemed like it was the only issue that she really cared about.
Yeah. Well, I know they ran a hateful campaign. Even my neighbor, who's a good Democrat and was friends with me for quite a while, came up and said that we were Nazis.
Because you were supporting,
because we're
not supporting.
Yeah, we weren't supporting Harris.
And that terminology and that just aggressiveness towards people that hold different political views, it's not just with, political operatives. It is ingrained now in our justice system, in our intelligence agencies, in the military. And, one thing I was kind of happy to see was that NBC News was reporting that when Donald Trump was elected, Merrick Garland was stunned on election night, and that senior Justice Department officials were literally weeping when they saw the election results. And they should be crying, because these guys have weaponized and politicized our justice system at every level. And there has to be accountability for this targeting. So I'm glad that they're fearful. I'm glad that they're crying. And I'll tell every official in the Department of Justice, you better lawyer up. Because just like you've said over the last 4 years with President Trump, nobody is above the law. And if you've been conspiring against the rights of Catholics, of parents going to school board meetings, of a former president, well, you're not above the law, and you should lawyer up, and we're going to ensure that you're held accountable.
How did the Attorney General get to the point he's at now? I mean, he had a reputation of being somewhat of a moderate when he was on the Court of Appeals. As a matter of fact, Obama had nominated him for the Supreme Court, and of course, in retrospect, we're very happy he didn't get on. But this is supposed to be a very mild-mannered, moderate attorney, judge, and now he's become this radical Attorney General.
Well, I think Merrick Garland was very skilled at positioning himself as a moderate, and he did have those hopes and aspirations of becoming a Supreme Court justice. And in order to serve on the Supreme Court, you have to be confirmed by the United States Senate, and the Senate likes to have nominees who are, I guess, easygoing, especially for the Supreme Court. And he definitely was able to kind of employ that strategy. However, we saw his true colors when he became Attorney General, and we've seen how Joe Biden really took advantage of him and was really able to convince him to weaponize that Department of Justice. But we've also seen something similar with this New York Supreme Court Justice Juan Merchan. President Trump has joked that when you look at Juan Merchan, he looks like a very distinguished guy, right? He puts on this aura of being a very judicial type of person. However, Judge Merchan, just to remind the audience, is the person that had been targeting Trump with all of those claims in New York. And Justice Merchan's daughter, his adult daughter, has been raising money off of this trial. And what we come to find out is that a lot of these judges are actually political activists, and they have to be held accountable.
Mm-hmm. Well, the same with the judge that oversaw the trial on the bidding process or the process of setting the value of his property.
Are you talking about Trump in New York?
Yeah,
the real estate.
Erdogan.
Right.
Yeah.
Or Erdogan, yeah, that's right. And he seemed to be kind of a little,
biased?
Not only in left field, but out in the bleachers somewhere. He was just goofy. I mean,
very much so.
Coming up with $500 million for a fraud that hurt no one, that wasn't even a fraud, but a conspiracy that didn't hurt anybody, and that even those who were supposed to be the potential victims came into court and said, no, we were happy with the valuations.
Right. Clearly.
And how sad for New York State. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm a small-town Iowa guy. I was born and raised in a town of 3,000 people, but when you go to New York City, it's an iconic city, and the state of New York has such a storied history, and there's so much great business there, and for these judges to employ this lawfare, it's going to bankrupt their state. You're already hearing about companies leaving.
I'd leave
after
too.
A former president. Yeah,
I'd leave too. All right, I want to talk about something going on in New York right now that may be a little out of your bailiwick, but it's a Daniel Penny case. Here we have this ex-Marine who was in a subway underground when this man came in and started threatening people. And obviously he had some mental problems, but he threatened to kill people. People in the subway car were scared, and this guy stood up and he tackled him, took him down, held him until police came. And ultimately, because he died now, Daniel Penny is being charged by Alvin Bragg, with manslaughter. And he's facing, 15, 20 years in prison over this. It seems to me that this is a kind of case that wouldn't have happened 15, 20 years ago. That is pretty clear-cut what happened, yet they're trying...
Yeah, this case is just another example of leftists employing a presumption of guilt for political purposes. We need to get beyond this presumption of guilt that these left-wing attorneys are trying to employ, and it's no coincidence that the Manhattan DA trying this case is Alvin Bragg, who's the same Alvin Bragg that's been targeting President Trump. And many people believe that Alvin Bragg is prosecuting this case due to race. I've heard that Al Sharpton is talking about this case, and if you look at it, just at the basic facts, is that Daniel Penny is a well-trained, and people have called him a peaceful Marine, and that he wanted to protect innocent life from this homeless man who was on drugs, threatening to kill people. And he was even threatening a mother with a child in a stroller. And anybody who's been willing to testify in this court case, they all agree that their lives are in danger. And the homeless man even said that he didn't care if he went to jail for the rest of his life. Somebody, he said, quote, was going to die. So I think it's very clear. You mentioned it earlier, 15 or 20 years ago, this case would be open and shut pretty quickly. From my understanding of New York state law is that Mr. Penny has justification to use whatever force is necessary to confront the deadly force that was about to be used against that mother and the child.
So this is, you think it's a political prosecution?
I do, absolutely. Okay. It had all the hallmarks of a political railroad job, and we're seeing different facts start to come out, like the fact that the homeless person was not, in fact, dead when police arrived on the scene. And that chokehold that Mr. Penny employed is something that they trained us in the military. I was a former Army officer. In Army combatives, we trained on how to employ that rear naked choke, which is a very powerful choke. It cuts off the oxygen and the blood to the brain, and we are trained under supervision to employ that. And I think that Mr. Penny actually had a very good escalation of force. He could have really went to work on that guy, but instead he employed the right type of a hold that would allow the person to be apprehended by police, which is, it looks like that's what had happened.
Yeah, because he was still breathing, wasn't he, when the police got there and took him?
Yes, and that, again, these are facts that have come out how many months, if not a year after the initial media craze around this case. So again, they're selectively releasing details of the case to make it appear that Penny is guilty, when in fact it looks like not only was he innocent, but that he's a true American hero.
Yeah. No, you talk about Alvin Bragg and then Letitia James, who is the Attorney General there. They both ran for office indicating that they were going to get Trump. They didn't know what they were going to get him for, but they were going to sure get him. It seems to me that there's an ethical violation there, and they should have been disqualified from office for that.
I agree 100%. And not only were they campaigning on that, I believe that Fannie Willis was doing the same thing when she ran for the DA position in Fulton County, Georgia. But after the election, after the American people spoke, with this clear rebuke of Lawfare, Letitia James came out and had a press conference, and she said that she will not stop going after President Trump, which these people, they need to be held accountable. I know that the Article 3 Project has filed some bar complaints with people, some ethics complaints against some of these different judges, and that's what they're going to have to, I guess, contend with now, is that we're going to have to engage counter-lawfare efforts to kind of get us back to where we should be, that judges should be ruling not for any political purpose. They shouldn't be running for office, saying they're going to go after people, but they just need to enforce the laws and adjudicate them appropriately like our founding fathers had envisioned.
I really like the idea that the Article 3 Project discerns these judicial appointments for our administration. But one of the things that concerns me is it seems to me there's a trending position where a lot of the public is, or not a lot, some of the decisions that are decided by our judicial branch have kind of a casual disregard for their decision. Two examples that stand out are the student loan program that the administration put in force, and then the Supreme Court shut it down and they reinstated it blatantly in defiance of the decision. And then most recently, in Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, the election board said, we don't care what the Supreme Court said. We're going to go ahead and count those ballots. So how can our judicial system overcome some of these casual, blatant disregards for their decisions?
Yeah, on that last case in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, those county commissioners need to be prosecuted. I mean, it looks like these leftists, that the only thing that they'll adhere to is going to prison. Right? I don't think there's anything else that we can do to get the message through some of these people. They obviously haven't seen where the American people stand. The election results, I guess, mean nothing to some of these people. And with the Supreme Court, Joe Biden was very flippant with some of these decisions and said that he was just going to continue on. And I believe that was a political decision. I think it was a Hail Mary to continue to keep this hope alive for young voters that their college loans could be forgiven, which is a very bad precedent for the President of the United States to set. And with the Supreme Court justices, many of these people, like Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, they had their homes protested. They had protesters marching in front of their homes. And, Brett Kavanaugh was almost assassinated. A potential assassin was arrested. And I know some of these judges who have kids are fearful for their kids' safety. And that is all on Merrick Garland. It's all on the U.S. Marshals for not enforcing the rule of law. Those people should have been arrested. They should have been sent to jail. They're violating the law. And we've just seen a selective enforcement of the law by our law enforcement agencies under the political leadership of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Merrick Garland.
I'm glad to hear you say that there needs to be consequences for those actions against the court's decisions.
Yeah, that's something that we've been neglecting here for a while, and I think that's why crime is out of hand, is because nobody gets punished for anything.
And fraud and abuse.
Right, and in politics, nobody seems to get fired for anything anymore. Trump was good at that.
DOD. Yeah. I've seen it in the Department of Defense. I served in the military. I went to Afghanistan. I went to South Korea. And I've had to serve under these general officers who, quite frankly, have never won a war. Mm-hmm. Like General Mark Milley and the current Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. They had a botched withdrawal from Afghanistan that cost the lives of people, and nobody's been fired. And I think under President Trump and now with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy with the Department of Government Efficiency, I think we're going to start to see people actually terminated, laid off for poor performance.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that will happen. But
and thank you for your service. Yeah. But I want to get that in there.
Oh, yes.
Because, Mark, that's huge. We appreciate everything that you sacrificed for us.
Now, we are running out of time, so I want to let everybody know, or I want you to let everybody know, how people can find out more about the Article 3 project. And Article 3, so that people don't misunderstand what we're talking about. Article 3 is the article in the Constitution that deals with the judiciary.
Correct. And you can go to the article3project.org. You can follow us on social media there. You can donate there. But more importantly, take action. We have an action alert where you can contact both your United States senators and tell them to show up to work and vote against Joe Biden's last-minute lame duck judicial nominees. Between now and when President Trump is inaugurated, Elizabeth Warren and Chuck Schumer are trying to ram through these bad judicial nominees. They're the bottom of the barrel. They're the worst of the worst. And we've got to have the Republican senators show up to work and vote no against those judges.
And these are lifetime appointments that we're talking about.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right. Well, Mark, want to thank you for joining us today. We certainly appreciate it. And again, if anybody wants to contact you, we would encourage them to do so, and maybe get your bulletins so that they know what is going on and can contact our two senators, because that is important. These confirmations for judges, very, very important. And every judge that is denied by the nominee that's turned down right now is going to be another spot that the new president will be able to appoint. So we hope we'll do that. Bart, thank you very much for joining us. God bless you. We admire what you are doing, and we hope our listeners will take heed of the messages that you had.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Thank you. We will see you later. You're listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network, and we will be right back after these messages. And we're back. You're listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network, and we have right now with us John Brusch, who is a senior counsel with the Alliance Defending Freedom, and he's also vice president of the Appellate Advocacy program over there at Alliance Defending Freedom. Very good people over there. We've had them on a lot of times. We've had John on before, and surprisingly, he came back.
Yeah. Good morning.
Got an interesting.
Good morning. So happy to be here.
Yeah, you got an interesting case in Colorado involving looks like a counselor who is not allowed to say certain things during counseling sessions. So why don't you just kind of take it from there, and then we'll get into the hard questions Gina has for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So our client in this case is Kaylee Childs. She is a Colorado counselor who specializes in talking to clients about difficult issues, including those involving sexuality. And as you know, there is a great mental health need in the United States right now, in particular for adolescents and children who are experiencing gender dysphoria, the notion that they're somehow trapped in the wrong body. So a boy who believes that he's a girl, or a girl who believes she's a boy, or any other one of what some people have identified as dozens and dozens of gender identities. The problem is that when those individuals need help, in Colorado and 20 other states and more than 100 local jurisdictions, they can't even have those conversations with a counselor without the counselor being at risk of losing their license. And that's because they've enacted laws, including in Colorado, that censor and prohibit private client counselor conversations that encourage a child or an adolescent to align their mind with their body. Now, if they want to encourage them to act out with a transgender identity and then pursue puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and surgery and all these other things that science tells us is very bad for those kids, they're not only free to do that, the law encourages them to do that. But the law prohibits the counselor from doing the exact opposite, encouraging those kids to live in a way that recognizes the beauty of their body and helps them align their identity with it. And so that's a problem not only for counselors, but it's a problem for tens of thousands of children across the United States who desperately need the mental health services that counselors like Kaylee can provide.
Let me ask you a question about which counselors are covered by this law. Would this cover a clergyman if somebody came to me, for example, as a deacon, came to me and wanted some advice and counseling on something? I'm not a licensed counselor, but people do ask me questions once in a while and take what I say, hopefully, with more than a grain of salt. Am I covered by that?
In
law?
Colorado, you would not be covered.
Okay.
The law only applies to the licensed counselors, and the threat and punishment, in addition to fines and things like that, is the loss of your license.
Okay.
So clergy members, priests, deacons are exempt from the law.
Okay, all right. And I take it then friendly aunts and uncles would be exempt too.
Yeah, certainly family members would too. And so you can start to see how this sets up kind of a strange situation that you could have a conversation with a young person, an aunt or uncle could have a conversation with a young person, but Kaylee can't have that same conversation with a young person. She could even have that conversation with another adult outside of the counseling context. But if she talks to a minor in the counseling office, then that puts her license at risk.
So that means the most vulnerable among us are the ones that are denied her service.
Exactly. And there's a whole population that we haven't even talked about that the mental health profession has recognized is desperately in need of these services. And these are individuals, they're labeled detransitioners. They've identified as a different gender than their sex. They've even taken some steps, whether that be name and pronouns and dress or other things, to try to accomplish that, and then realize that was a mistake. And so now they want to go back to identifying with their natal sex. And they're desperately in need of mental health services for that. And in more than 20 states and 100 local jurisdictions, they can't get that help. It's really an outrageous abridgment of not only the free speech rights of the counselor, but of the pressing needs of those individual clients.
All right, now this has been happening for a number of years, and I imagine there are dozens of cases out there. Have any like this gone to the Supreme Court before?
Well, we had another case out of the state of Washington involving a counselor. His name was Brian Tingley. Same situation, virtually identical law. And we went to the Supreme Court. And what you do when you go to the Supreme Court, obviously they don't hear every single case. They hear less than 1% of all the petitions that are submitted to them.
Yeah, that's a pretty good job if you can get it. You don't have that much work to do. There's no heavy lifting, and it's all indoor work.
Exactly. And they take the whole summer off, starting at the beginning of July. So we got the case up there, and of the 9 justices, you need 4 of them to say, yes, we would like to hear the case. And when we brought Mr. Tingley's case, there were 3 who said yes, and went on record saying so, and explained in a couple of dissents why this issue was so important, how it was dividing the federal courts of appeals, which were reaching different results as to whether these laws are valid or not. And so we're hoping that now there's been yet another federal court of appeals adding to the conflict, that we'll be able to get that 4th vote, and they'll hear the free speech claim.
That should almost be a trigger, shouldn't it, if the courts of appeals are differing?
Yes, that's the primary thing that the Supreme Court looks at when it decides whether to take a case, are the courts of appeals in conflict, because you can't have different constitutional rights in Colorado and Washington than you do in Florida and Georgia, which is the case right now, as well as in some other circuits. Yeah. But sometimes the court will wait until that conflict deepens or ripens so that there are more cases for them to consider, more inputs, more reasoning by lower court judges. Now we've reached a point where the split is 2-2, which is getting to be fairly deep. And in addition to that, there are courts who are using the ruling in the Ninth Circuit and the Tenth Circuit, which upheld these laws, to uphold speech censorship in other contexts. So, for example, if there was a doctor who wanted to say certain things about COVID and COVID medications and the need for vaccines and things like that, the government, some officials are claiming the right to be able to censor that speech because he's a licensed professional, and they're invoking these same laws or these same rulings in order to do that. In fact, in Oregon, they've basically categorically excluded anyone who won't profess to follow the LGBT agenda from being foster or adoptive parents. And again, one of the bases for that, they're invoking these cases. They're saying, well, because you license adoption and foster care, that the state has the right to regulate their speech. And so there's a case that we have pending right now of a Christian mom who wants to adopt in Oregon, and she's being prohibited from doing so because she won't promise to transition the child that she eventually takes into her home if he or she would profess to be transgender.
Wow, and I could see this extrapolating to teachers and even lawyers under these this kind of a ruling. So maybe
Absolutely.
You could explain the difference to us between how it's the thing that confused me in this case is how some circuits referred to it as speech and some circuits referred to it as conduct. How do they come to this determination, and explain the difference maybe?
Well, basically by ipse dixit, when they just proclaim it to be true.
Okay.
So we all understand that when we're engaged in speech, just talking like we are right now, that we have a First Amendment right to do that, and the government has very little ability to say anything about that. Now, if we were engaged in obscene conduct like pornography, the First Amendment may not apply to that. Or if we were inciting violence, encouraging other people to go out and burn down buildings, there's limits on that. But generally, any talking or writing that we do, the First Amendment protects that. Well, in order to uphold these bad laws, which are hurting people, what some courts have said is if you're a licensed professional, like a counselor or a doctor or a lawyer or anybody else where there's some tether to the state, some states, they license hairdressers, so you could put hairdressers in that category too, then that gives the state the ability to regulate all of that speech as conduct related to the practice of the profession. Now, what's bizarre about that is that when you're talking about counseling, there is no conduct that's taking place. All that's happening is speech. And so what the courts that have struck down these laws on free speech grounds have said is that if that's the standard, then the state, the government bureaucrats can just relabel anything as conduct and call that good. So let's say that you had a book club, and the government says, well, that discussion that's taking place in the coffee shop, that's conduct, so we can regulate that, and the First Amendment has nothing to say about that. So there's nothing inherent about speech that would suggest that it should be labeled conduct, and yet that's how they're getting around the First Amendment. And what's particularly bizarre about that is it flies right in the face of an important U.S. Supreme Court ruling from a few years ago in the pro-life context. We've got pro-life pregnancy centers that are all across California, and California, as you know, is one of the most pro-abortion states in the country, and they don't like pregnancy resource centers. So the legislature passed a law that the governor signed that required these pro-life centers to provide information to their clients about where they could get a government-subsidized abortion. Well, if you're a pro-life pregnancy center, being forced to speak a message to promote abortion that the government will help pay for violates your conscience. You should never be able to force speech like that. And the California authorities invoke the same theory. They said, well, because some of these pregnancy centers are licensed, we have the ability to regulate them as professionals, including their speech. And the U.S. Supreme Court unequivocally overruled that law, said it was unconstitutional. And their reasoning was that there is no constitutional difference between professional speech and lay speech, that it's all just speech, and the First Amendment protects it. And so, given that holding, you would have thought it would have been difficult for the Ninth and Tenth Circuits to say that this is professional speech that the government can regulate. But yet they went against that ruling, distinguished it, and here we are with the 2-2 circuit split.
Okay, now you, I guess it's the Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against you, and did the District Court rule against you too in this case?
Yes, both the District Court and the Tenth Circuit ruled against Kaylee, and so that's what gives us the opportunity to go to the Supreme Court. And thankfully, we're not there alone. We have I think, about a dozen amici briefs, those are friend of the court briefs, where other groups, including those who support the ability of young people who need this mental health counseling to be able to get it, who have all said to the court, look, it's been long enough, people are getting hurt, it's time for you to resolve the conflict in the Court of Appeals and decide the First Amendment issue.
Yeah, I know. I followed some of those cases in the Supreme Court, and the amicus briefings could go on forever. Some of those, like every lawyer in the country is writing a brief on this case.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have that many in this case yet. In part because you don't tend to see, we will, you don't tend to see very many amici briefs at the petition stage. So, for example, when Mississippi submitted its cert petition to the Supreme Court in the Dobbs case, there was a relatively small handful of amici parties that filed briefs, like around 8 or 10. But then once it got accepted and the court agreed to hear it on the merits, there were more than 100 that were filed on both sides.
Yeah, I remember seeing that in other cases when you're petitioning for cert. You don't get all the amicus briefs, but later when it's accepted, then they just pile on.
They come out of the woodwork.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I have a question about the First Amendment in this case at all. Has there been any discussion about the religious animus in this case? Kaylee's inability to practice her faith in her work as a therapist?
There has been some discussion, not as much in the judge's rulings in this case, but in talking about the Christian principles that motivate her desire to help people with these very difficult situations. In the Brian Tingley case, the one that came out of Washington, there was a dissent in the Ninth Circuit which talked expressly about the religious animus and discrimination. It made the point that the individuals who engage in counseling that want to encourage young people to align their minds with their body are almost invariably motivated by religious reasons. For whatever reason, secular counselors haven't been able to wrap their mind around the idea that it's not healthy to align someone's body with their mind rather than their mind with their body. For example, we would never tell someone who's experiencing anorexia, which is also a dysphoria, where someone has a different vision in their mind of what their body is than what reality of their body is. We would never tell them to align their body with their mind by eating less or having a surgery so that they were thinner to match that idea in their mind that they were too fat. And other dysphorias, for example, if there's a very rare one where someone feels like a piece of their body doesn't belong there, and they might deeply desire to remove their arm or to remove an ear or something like that. And no self-respecting doctor or counselor would ever encourage them to actually remove that body part to give them relief. The gender dysphoria is the only one where anyone is suggesting that we should be aligning the mind with the body. So in the religious community, certainly as Catholics, we have a much better understanding of human body and human sexuality, that the church teaches that we are embodied souls, so we're not just souls trapped in a body that can be manipulated, but that our body expresses something about who we are. And so that's why if one of you would slap my face, I wouldn't say, you slapped my body, you slapped me. We identify us with our body. And every week at Mass, we proclaim in the Nicene Creed that at the end of time, our bodies and souls will be reunited in heaven forever. So our bodies are incredibly important. And it's that same religious principle that nearly always motivates counselors to help these kids align their mind with the body. These laws also typically apply to same-sex attraction. And if there's an adolescent or teenager who wants to be able to live a life that's consistent with their church's teaching, say the Catholic Church's teaching that marriage can only be between one man and one woman, then the counselors will help them do that. But these are almost always religious. And so where you tend to see these laws in places like Colorado, Washington, California, some of these local jurisdictions, it's almost always because there's some hostility to religion by government officials, and they're trying to stamp out what is best for human flourishing, which is aligning our human sexuality with God's plan for our body and for marriage, and not with our culture's ideas.
And some courts recognize that it's an attack on people of faith.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Now, you're in the early process here. You just filed, I think, within the last week or so, your cert petition. How long does it normally take to get a cert petition answered? And what is your judgment of what's going to happen? Are you going to be heard by the Supreme Court? And if so, do you have the votes to win the day?
Well, you never know for sure, but we're optimistic that now, given this additional data point, that we'll be able to bump that number of justices who say yes from 3 to 4, and so we'll get up there. The timing is difficult to predict. The state has 30 days to respond to our cert petition, but they can ask for an extension of up to 60 days. And what complicates things for the timing is that the Supreme Court only hears oral arguments from October until April, and then they write opinions until the end of June, and then they take off July and August and September until they start to get ready for their new term in September. So if Colorado would respond right away, we could still have an oral argument yet this term in April, and we could have a decision by June, which would be terrific, not only for Kaylee Childs, but for her clients and for counseling clients across the country, because this ruling would have the effect of invalidating all these bad laws. But if Colorado requests a long extension and gets it from the court, it would push any oral argument into next fall, and then we might not get a decision until June of 2026. That's kind of an untenable delay.
Yeah,
so Colorado recently told us they want to request a 60-day extension, which would result in the year-long delay. We told them that we weren't going to agree to that. We needed a much shorter extension to make sure that this is heard more quickly. And they have not submitted their request to the Supreme Court yet. I expect them to do that soon. But we'll take the position that court should make them file quickly so that the case can be heard. And if the court agrees with us and gives them a very short extension, that might be a good indication that the justices are thinking very seriously about hearing it yet this term.
Good. All right. But it still is slow as molasses sometimes.
The legal system can be very slow.
We're pretty much out of time right now. I want to give you a chance to let everybody know how they can get a hold of ADF. I think it's, adflegal.org?
That's correct. adflegal.org is a great place to track all of our cases. You can read more about Kaylee Childs, but also about the many, many other clients that we have who are seeing their free speech and religious liberty and parental rights infringed, as well as our many pro-life cases. And we encourage folks to pray for all of our clients, to pray for the lawyers, to pray for the judges and the justices, and to pray for those who are on the other side that don't understand God's plan for human flourishing. And lastly, any support that folks can give us is we so much appreciate, because all the work that we do for our clients is for free. We represent our clients pro bono, no cost to them.
And litigation can be very expensive, and it
can be.
It's a good way to put some of your loose change to work for the good.
We greatly appreciate that. And as you know, our mission is to keep the doors open for the spread of the gospel. And so what we do is to make sure that counselors like Kaylee, but also broadcasters like you, have the ability to spread the gospel and try to build God's kingdom here on earth without government interference. And hopefully we can all support that mission.
We can. Thank you. John Brusch, thank you very much for joining us. We will talk to you again later sometime. And in the meantime, good luck and God bless you.
Thank you. God bless you as well.
Thank you. We'll be right back after these messages. You're listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. And we're back once again. You're still listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network, and we are here to wrap up this program.
Yes,
Gina.
Well, if I've learned anything today, I've learned that the court's precedents and implications of their decisions are very broad-based and can affect all kinds of general population.
We're going to send you to law school. We take our little hiatus here in another month. Maybe that's what you ought to do.
Is that what I should do? Yeah. Go back to law school?
There's a good law school down the street. Yeah.
That would be an interesting thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a little bit of money, too, so I don't know. You think the radio station would pay for my education?
I don't know.
I'll ask.
Take a basket around to people and go from parish to parish. Yeah.
I'll be real anxious to follow article3project.org as we move into this next administration's transition to see how those judge appointments are being made. I'm really glad that they and Heritage are taking an interest in advising the administration on those appointments.
Yeah. We should remind people that we will not be back next week. We'll have a best of next week because it's Thanksgiving and we tape on Thursdays. So, but we will be back after Thanksgiving with our final 3 episodes of Faith on Trial before we take our aforementioned retreat or sabbatical, whatever it is that we're going to take. But that's it for this week, and we won't see you next week, but we'll see you in 2 weeks. So let's end with our Defender's Prayer. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. That's it. We'll see you in 2 weeks. In the meantime, don't forget to go to church and take your kids.
Our freedom of conscience and religion is being challenged by laws and regulations imposed by secular society. Faith on Trial, with Defender of the Faith, Deacon Mike Mano. Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio, iowacatholicradio.com, and the Iowa Catholic Radio app.
Support for Faith on Trial and Iowa Catholic Radio provided in part by Imogene Ingredients.